Okay, welcome to the weekly address, the SDC weekly address for the week of Sunday, January 10th, 2010. This week I'd like to begin talking about the Ross Peterson book that I finally got a copy of. This was printed in 77, and it gives kind of a overview of where Ross Peterson was at the time, and apparently at that time he had been giving readings for I think about a year or two, something like that, and they kept saying he had given about 1,000 readings. So that was about the time frame in his kind of career as a deep trance meditation psychic, the first or second, depending on if you count Paul Solomon, in the vein of Edgar Casey. And on that note, it is kind of interesting that he and Paul Solomon started about the same time, because, I'd have to go back and see the exact dates, but this guy, Ross Peterson, got started sometime in the early to mid-70s, regularly giving readings. And Paul Solomon gave his first reading in 72, so they're definitely right around the same time frame. They both came around. And I'm not sure if they knew about each other at all at the time. In fact, I'm pretty darn sure that Paul Solomon did not know about Ross Peterson. I could be wrong, and maybe I'll find evidence to the contrary in the future here. But that's the way it seemed to me, reading all the stuff about Paul Solomon and his readings that I've gotten to so far. By the way, Volume 2 of Paul Solomon is supposed to come out within, I don't want to tie it to a specific time frame or anything, but I believe within the next few weeks or months. So greatly look forward to that, and we'll discuss those as they come along. But anyway, so yeah, this Ross Peterson book. This was kind of, aside from the few things I gleaned on the internet, this was kind of the grand introduction for me to Ross Peterson, called Ross Peterson, The New Edgar Casey, by Alan Spraggett. And apparently Alan Spraggett was the same person that decided to interview Ross Peterson on, I think, a show on Canadian television. And they have, he has kind of an account of that episode towards the middle, and handy action photos of the events. Since this is a sophisticated audio-visual presentation, I'll include these pictures. So that's Alan Spraggett, I guess, at the top, and there's Ross Peterson looking kind of like one of the founding fathers or something. And that's his fiancée, I believe, at the time. She became his wife, his last wife, I think. Her name was Ira David, and she became Ira Peterson. So in the recordings that are on the Google video that guy has up of Ross Peterson, she's the one that's the conductor for all those. And so I guess throughout his kind of professional career, she was his standard conductor. And this is some doctor they had interviewing, Ross Peterson, who was very impressed. He the doctor picked one of his cases at random, one of his medical cases, and Ross Peterson, accurately diagnosed it and everything. So instead of just being mathematically precise or following a rote outline that the book does, why don't we just start with that? The medical readings, because as this book points out, and as is definitely true for all the sources I've come across, except for Davis, because as far as I know, they didn't write down his medical readings. But he apparently, that was the main thing he did too. But all these medical readings by these sources are probably the most accurate, precise, in-depth, time after time, consistently dead-on content that you will find in the readings. I think that's a very safe statement. And that probably, I assume, has to do with the fact that this technique and the skill is really related to spiritual development, apparently, and morality. Things normally associated with religion also relate directly to this skill, if you will. So it makes sense then that an application of this that directly involves helping people at the front line, so to speak, that's going to be where they're the most accurate, and it definitely is. And that's, of course, what really attracted me to Edgar Cayce, first of all, and a lot of people. I think probably it's safe to say, by and large, the majority of people that are attracted to these readings are first attracted by the accuracy of the medical readings and the fact that they can't be explained by anything else. If you read about them, just spend a little bit of time reading about them from all these sources. There's absolutely no way, especially for the remote diagnosis, which they did a lot. They would take absentee readings, and that means there's somebody 1,000 miles away or whatever that wants a reading, and they just have to be a certain place at a certain time, I think, so the source can locate them, make sure it's got the right person, and the source will immediately diagnose their problem as if the entire human form was transparent and the entity could just go into any microscopic part or zoom in, zoom out, go to any portion, examine it all, and tell in as much detail as was required what the illness was. Now, there's just no way that could have been done without meticulously studying the medical record and past of the person involved. But even that would not allow the source to diagnose problems that had not yet been detected or had not become bad enough to be detected, but then were later on. I mean, if you seriously and honestly look into this, for all these sources, it becomes very clear, very fast, that there is no explanation for how they do this except for what is given, for the explanation they give, which is that they are tapping in to other dimensions, higher dimensions, the higher self of the individual, and higher entities, the Akashic record, etc., etc. And these clairvoyant abilities, these psychic abilities, these abilities to channel, give them the ability to make virtually infallible medical diagnoses time after time after time, no matter whether the individual is right there in the room next to them or across the globe somewhere. It doesn't even matter. So that was definitely the case for Ross Peterson as well, which should put to rest anyone's fears that he was not a valid Edgar Cayce per se. However, there, according to the source, the Ross Peterson source itself, there are some slight differences between himself and Edgar Cayce, and that's kind of that answers some questions I really had, and kind of opens up my awareness of this process a little bit more. And that's probably the other thing I should talk about, and he talks about it as well, so we'll get to it, is how we can accomplish the same technique and other related techniques ourselves, given enough discipline, goodwill, and regular practice, and et cetera, et cetera. But, so yeah, that'll come along. I want to just kind of go through the table of contents and comment briefly on the various topics they covered. And it's not a long book. It's only like, I don't know, 180 pages or something with the pictures. So, so let's see here. First, oh wow, I guess the television interview is like one of the first things the author starts with. He kind of jumps around. goes through Ross Peterson's past, and Ross Peterson had a really colorful past. Obviously, they go on and on about how he was kind of had this playboy kind of lifestyle for a while before he got more spiritually oriented. He was had alcohol problems and all sorts of stuff before he kind of turned around and then got onto this path. And it goes through some case histories of his successes and failures and things. So that chapter about the successes and failures was about the medical diagnoses. And a few failures. One thing that was interesting is the author noted that around the same period of time, there were 2 readings, one given for the author and one given for a medical patient, and they were both really off. And as in the diagnosis was flat out incorrect, or he missed some flagrant things for that individual. And then for the author, it was supposed to be some psychoanalytical kind of reading, and it apparently was way off as well, according to the author. So, and that was supposed to be this time where Ross Peterson was taking some painkillers that apparently weren't even the right kind, and they were like really, for what he had, and they were really, really strong or something in prescription. They're, I guess, prescribed for something else or somebody else or something, and he was using them, I don't know. And they were apparently, and I guess it kind of makes sense, if you think about it, if the brain is a channel and is an intricate part of this process, the mind, the various parts of the mind, speech centers, etc., etc., if you take mind-altering drugs, it's going to interfere with the readings. And by the same token, other things that interfere with the mind, I think strong emotions and skepticism on the part of other people around him, and they definitely say the skepticism and mistrust between the conductor and the seer, those can also have a really negative impact on the accuracy and depth of the readings. So that was kind of interesting. And since this table of contents seems to be really too high level, I just wanted to mention there's one part in here where he talks about some readings that they had done, specifically asking about his methods of going into the trance, how they compared to those of Edgar Casey. And the source apparently said that from one perspective, there could be viewed 12 levels of 12 dimensions in a way is what they said, or 12 levels of trance is almost what it was more like. But instead of talking about it like levels of trance, it seemed like they were almost talking about it as in heights of spiritual elevation that his higher mind could go to. And once he reached a certain height, it was just too glorious. It's like the light was too bright, and he could only stay there for a few seconds or something to get a little snippet of information and had to come back down. Which that jives exactly with some things Paul Solomon said, and a lot that Andrew Jackson Davis has said about these spiritual realms, and how that's really what separates the different strata of the spiritual realms is the affinity, where a person is at in their holiness, if you will, or basically their vibration, if you want to get more scientific, or their mindset, psychologically. That will determine which of those levels they feel the most comfortable at. So if it's a level that's too far beneath them, too carnal, if you will, then they'll feel uncomfortable there. If it's a level that's way too far above them in holiness and structure and justice and all this, then it will be too uncomfortable for them. So Davis says that everyone in the spiritual realm naturally gravitates towards one of these levels of spiritual existence. And that seems, in a way, it seems to be exactly what the source was talking about in these Ross Peterson readings, where he's talking about levels that the higher mind could go to in accessing information. So he put numbers on it. He said that Casey spent a lot of the time at this 9th level, and often went to the 10th, so the higher the number being the more spiritually advanced or whatever. And he said that Ross Peterson, don't quote me on this, but I believe he was saying, I know it was less. I think he was saying Ross Peterson spent most of his time at the 8th level, and then occasionally would touch upon the 9th. And they didn't give that whole reading, so I'm not sure how much it said. And definitely what was not clear from their description was how that impacted the information you get. What kind of information could you get at those higher levels, or what kind of detail, etc., that you couldn't get at the lower levels? And then what did that have to do with communicating with other entities that were supposedly present? For instance, there were like 5 or 9 or something entities that were kind of charged with taking care of Ross Peterson. And so, but supposedly we all have a group of entities like this that's kind of responsible for following our lifetime and helping us out in various ways. So it's not clear to me how reaching those levels of spiritual advancement or whatever in the trance, how that impacts communication with those other entities or reading from the Akashic Records. I'm not really sure, but again, that does kind of fit with what I get from Douglas Cottrell. Not to say he's inferior or anything. I mean, it's just flat out amazing that he can even do this, and he's the only one alive in the world as far as I know. The source said there were more, but the only one I know of that I've encountered so far that can do this in the flesh currently is Douglas Cottrell. But it does seem to be completely the same a lot of times, but some other times it seems like the reading is not quite able to give you the information that you're looking for, and in a context where you have the feeling that you should have been able to get that kind of information. I'm trying to think of specific examples from mine. One thing that Douglas Cottrell will often say is he's consulting other minds. He's consulting other minds that seem to be in agreement or not in agreement with that. And that makes you wonder, are those just other minds at one of those spiritual levels and he can't communicate with the ones above? Or at that point in time he can't communicate with the Akashic Records? Or he can only look at the part of the Akashic Record that has to do with you and can't access the part that would have to do with those other topics? Or, you're not really sure. And actually that would be an interesting question to ask in a Douglas Cottrell session, was what are the limitations, kind of where is he at, and what does that mean as far as what kind of information he can give you or not in a reading and things. And he'll probably be able to tell you, which is interesting if you think about it, because even Ross Peterson was able to say, Casey was at such and such a level, Ross Peterson is at such and such a level, and even though Ross Peterson apparently had a little bit more of a limitation, he was still able to determine where he was at and where Casey was at in the grand scheme of things. So, by extension, it seems logical to assume then that as we discover more and more people that are able to do this, and as more and more people develop the ability to do this, then there will probably be different people at different levels. And maybe different people getting better, over time, getting to be more and more able to reach the higher levels. And Ross Peterson did talk about that quite a bit, the spiritual and moral advancement that in his life that went along with this thing, and how that was a necessary part of it for anyone aspiring to develop this kind of ability. So presumably, as your walk gets holier in all dimensions of your life, while you're going through this process of giving these readings for people, over time, presumably your ability to give more and more accurate readings and access higher and higher dimensions or levels of information will, that ability will increase. Of course, bearing in mind that the ability to reach any of those levels up in that range is stupendous, because look at the kind of information you can get. Look at the kind of information you can get from Douglas Cottrell. Still capable of all the medical diagnosis, still capable of giving all kinds of detailed information from the Akashic Records. It's not immediately clear what kind of detriment there is to someone a seer not being able to reach quite as high a level as Edgar Casey or something, it may in the end be trivial or something, or it may have to do with the kinds of people that get the readings. Maybe it just happens to be that they're more fitting for that kind of person or something. I don't know. As someone who's just learning the rules, by no means I'm going to make any kind of definitive statement about how all this works. Just trying to give you some insights I got from this Ross Peterson book. And he does have a big section at the end. Well, not that big. The book isn't that big. A section at the end about developing these abilities yourself and pointers. So first of all, he kind of tells you how to develop a more general psychic intuition where you can ask questions of your higher self and reliably get answers. And that's apparently kind of a first step, and a step that more people can more easily reach. And then if you really feel the need or want to, then you can get a conductor and works with you into the hypnotism and stuff, and get into these really deep levels of trance where you can then act as a channel in this similar manner to Casey and these other guys. So that was kind of useful. And the fact that he mentioned these other states, or this other state where you could go into a lighter trance, but then still reliably get answers back from the entities that are helping you and or your higher self, that was really useful, because it sounds like something more of us can do probably more easily, and also it jives completely with Andrew Jackson Davis's description of what he did. And I'm not sure if it's what Andrew Jackson Davis did always and he never got to this state. I think that's a completely false statement. I think he really did get to this super deep trance meditation channeling state from his own descriptions, and however, when he claims later on, like for the Great Harmonia, he no longer has a conductor, and he's using this method of going into the trance state, asking questions, getting answers, and then writing them down. That sounds a lot more like this shallower level of trance that Ross Peterson is talking about. It's one that can be fairly easily self-induced, and you don't have to have the conductor with you and all this stuff. So, and again, that kind of makes sense. What the question that's immediately begged and is not answered then is, why wasn't Andrew Jackson Davis aware that it was an inferior state of mind? In fact, he seemed to clearly indicate that it was an inferior state of mind. If you read the Principles of Nature, in the part where he's talking about the depths of trance and the levels of trance and the depths required to do various things, it's very clear that the depth required to just get answers like that but not really be in a channeling state was a shallower depth of trance, still useful but having more limitations. So it's almost seems like he didn't go back and read the Principles of Nature, or never read the thing clear through in detail, or forgot, because keep in mind this is a book that he apparently dictated from the channeling state, in the same way that the book The Secrets of Life was dictated by Douglas Cottrell. And these were books where the clairvoyant the seer would be in the deep trance, channeling, and the source would be dictating the book, the entire contents of the book. Apparently that was how the Principles of Nature was given, and also The Secrets of Life, which is the book by Douglas Cottrell. So, interesting tidbit, and I haven't read all the works of Andrew Jackson Davis. Maybe he got back into it. I haven't really read a definitive biography of him, or Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's book on the spiritualist movement, where apparently he does give some info on Davis. I haven't read those, so maybe there's more information on that. But it's just, from what I've seen so far, it seems like Andrew Jackson Davis started off being able to do this really deep trance meditation thing, but then moved away from it for whatever reason. Maybe he didn't trust the people he was working with or something. But and then later in life, he's just like manning some bookstore in Boston, and it's almost like a reverse of the way you think it should go or something. But that may just be the way it appears. I'm not sure. The books are still incredibly valuable, especially the Principles of Nature. Went through like 40 editions or something, and if you haven't read it, it's definitely worth all the time and patience it takes to plow through an 800-page book written in the 1800s. Just incredible. So, yeah. I guess I could take a brief, since this is all about rabbit trailing anyway. One of the things that Andrew Jackson Davis touches upon in the Principles of Nature is discussion of alien life in our solar system. Now keep in mind that Casey also touched upon this. He clearly indicated that all of the planets in our solar system, I believe, were schools in the sense that our Earth was a school. However, they weren't schools where the spirits were incarnated into earthly flesh. So they were not worlds of, rock and stone, hard flesh and blood, three-dimensional matter. They were levels of spirit. So they would be on the different planes of spiritual vibration, I think, or other dimensions, whatever you want to call those. By the way, there weren't only 12 when Douglas Cottrell was asked, I believe, and I believe Paul Solomon as well. Actually, I can't be sure which one I heard this exact number from. I think it was Cottrell. He was saying that there are 14 dimensions or 15, depending on how you look at it. And that other dimension would obviously have to do with something like the highest dimension that was no dimension, or something like that. But so that's more than 12. Maybe there are only 12 levels that are relevant in this psychic reading kind of thing, because maybe the lower ones are ones we inhabit, or you can't do psychic readings from, or something. But and it's not clear from KC whether it's just one dimension above us or two above us that is the dimension where these aliens, if you will, exist on the other planets in our solar system, or if there were several different dimensions on which they existed. But the one thing that was very clear was that, from Casey even, was that it was not our dimension. And Paul Solomon touches on this again. When directly asked, he says, look, if you go to Mars, you're not going to see anybody because they're on a different dimension. They're spiritual, they're on this other rate of vibration. So unless you change your rate of vibration to go to those other realms, you're not going to see anything. And by the same token, he claims that the UFOs that visit our planet, that's what they're doing. They're changing their rate of vibration to come into this earthly, three-dimensional, solid matter kind of realm. And apparently, if you read the Graham Hancock book, Supernatural, where he goes over a lot of the accumulated case histories of people that claim to have been abducted, he talks about how apparently the aliens can only stay here for a short amount of time, and apparently they're doing experiments of trying to create entities that are of their realm and of the Earth realm at the same time. And, I'm not sure how much of that is true, but it all kind of jives with these things that we're getting from these other sources, and they all seem very consistent. And the reason I want to give that kind of background is I didn't know most of that when I read Andrew Jackson Davis. The only thing I'd heard about was Casey, and my interpretation of what Casey had said at the time was that, the aliens are just spiritual. Those other worlds are just inhabited spiritually. And at the time, I didn't really understand things in terms of levels of dimensions and rates of vibration. I thought more of spiritual in the traditional sense, where it's just kind of this pretend reality that doesn't have as much meaning as our three-dimensional reality. And so when Davis started talking about aliens on these other planets, and especially when he got to describing alien life on Mars as if it was in the same dimension we are, he just didn't specify. But that was the assumption. If you don't specify, and the assumption is he's talking about something, if you go there, you'll see it, right? And of course, it's very clear that there's no beings walking around on Mars currently, and no structures that are immediately recognizable as ancient ruins. If there are structures that are ancient ruins, they're so pulverized by time that they're almost unrecognizable as such. So that was something that I really stumbled on. I was all gung-ho about Andrew Jackson Davis, so I get 2/3 of the way through the Principles of Nature. He starts talking about aliens on Mars, and I just about threw the book in the trash. Well, it was an online book, so that was kind of hard to do, but you know what I mean. But I stuck with it, because he said, if you discount someone's someone's portrayal just because you disagree with 1 or 2 points, then you really don't love the truth. You just love your own beliefs, and you're just looking for a reason to throw it away. And so I stuck with them, and I'm glad I did, because over time, putting it together with these other sources, it became very clear that that had to be what he was describing, was these other spiritual realms and what the life there was like on those planets. And the reason that that's kind of on my mind is Ross and Reglan had this fantastic Douglas Cottrell reading that he just posted, that he got done in December, I guess, and it was about life on Mars, presumably in our dimension. And apparently, the source is saying there was, even in our dimension, but it was like 30 billion years ago, or double the currently accepted age of the universe or something. So that infers that, number one, our estimate of the age of the universe is wrong, which, not too surprising. But then that begs a really interesting question that would be fascinating to ask of Douglas Cottrell is, okay, what about this age of the universe? Can you give us just some basics here? So if the planet Mars was flourishing and inhabited 30 billion years ago, well then how old is the solar system? We think it's only so many billion years old. How old is it really? And kind of give us a basic timeline from the inception of things, because Andrew Jackson Davis gives you the step-by-step portrayal from the latest Big Bang, basically, or active creation, to the present. It kind of gives you the sequence of events that has happened, and a very high-level overview of the creation. He talks about it in terms of circles of suns, or circles of galaxies, or maybe even circles of universes. I'm not sure how you'd look at it, but definitely circles of galaxies that are spun off from this large central mass that apparently we haven't discovered, like a large fiery body that's far greater than any sun or anything. That's Davis's portrayal of the universe, and he describes how solar systems then form and as kind of a large sphere that gradually cools and shrinks, and as it does, the planets start to coalesce, where the energy bubble shrinks down and there's just matter remaining. And he describes that whole process for our solar system without specific dates. So it would be interesting to see, number one, ask Douglas Cottrell, number one, is that a relatively accurate portrayal of how things went? And number two, what are the basic times? Approximately how long ago did the first planets start to form and all this stuff? So, really interesting topic, interesting readings in that regard, to hear that apparently there was even humanoid type life on Mars in the ancient past, like tens of billions of years ago, and that even some of them escaped to this Earth and elsewhere, which raises all kinds of fascinating issues, because he claims that there's a relationship between the technology used by Atlanteans and ancient civilizations to use the magnetic field lines of the Earth to levitate craft on, because apparently, like these pyramids that were laced with mica at the bottom, like we've found in Central America, he's claiming that there were, at all these key points in the ley lines of the Earth or whatever, they would have pyramids like that, and they were kind of these generating stations to generate the right type of field that the right type of craft could basically float on. He's saying that technology actually existed on Mars first, and so somehow, whether people who later evolved on Earth saw some structures that were built by the Martians, or read some documents, or were in contact psychically, or God knows how, somehow they apparently got wind of that type of technology, and he seems to be saying that's how they got the idea, basically. So it just opens up a whole new fascinating field with a whole different array of questions you can ask. And so go check that video out by Ross Reglan on YouTube. Just search for Douglas Cottrell, and it's his latest one. So fascinating stuff there. But getting back to Ross Peterson, so yeah, he talks about how to develop this thing yourself, gives a lot of really fascinating tidbits and pointers. So, don't use my description as a definitive guide to go try it yourself. You're getting like third-hand information here. But definitely, if you're interested in that, it's worth checking out this book, and just for that portion. So in a nutshell, he describes how you first use regular hypnosis to have somebody implant a suggestion in you to go into a deep trance when you go through a certain rote series of actions mentally, like counting through things or saying this or that in a rote manner. And if you read a good book on hypnotism, that is very standard. And actually, this is a book that was not recommended by the readings at all. So I don't want to say it was necessarily endorsed by the readings, but it's the one that I arrived at when I was looking for a good book on hypnotism the other night, after seeking guidance from my higher self and stuff. Not that I really know I got any kind of definitive answer or anything, but that was the context in which I was looking for this. And I feel like I got a great book as a result. So I'm just sharing with you what this book is. It's called Hypnosis for Beginners by William W. Hewitt. And here, I think I can go to the cover page so you can look at the cover. Yeah, here we go. Hypnosis for Beginners by William W. Hewitt. And this guy, if you get into his book, he's really benign, really benevolent. I mean, really interested in teaching people how to use hypnosis to help other people, and really how to keep from using it for the wrong reasons. And boy, he definitely seems aware of a lot of this philosophy of the higher self and the spiritual aspects of this as well, even though he seems to be totally ignorant of these psychic sources. He probably would have been fascinated to hear about them if he'd read some of these readings. But that's a really good book about the general technique of hypnotism. Has a whole course of study that you can use with a partner, or even in a pinch if you can't find one, some things you can do on your own with a tape recorder. So basically the idea is, not only are you undergoing this hypnotism from someone else when they read these suggestions to you, a large part of it is implanting suggestions in you that enable you to reach deeper and deeper and deeper levels of trance. And that seems to be the same technique that Ross Peterson encourages you to use, so that you can bottom out, so to speak. And then he describes this bottoming out. So for him, he gets to this point where he sees like this blue circle ringed with yellow, and it's kind of this embryo type of thing. And that's kind of a marker or a landmark for him in the psychic landscape, if you will, that he's reached a certain level. And he says right after that, he'll see like these 5 or 9 faces of these entities that are there to help him in kind of a semicircle around him. And then at that point I wasn't exactly clear when he started counting, but I think it was right after that, he would start taking a deep abdominal breath and say 10, at the same time to himself mentally, think 10. And then take the really deep breath and think 9 as he breathed it out. And that's what the conductor would be watching for, him taking these breaths. And he says that he almost never reached number 1, because by the time he got to about 7 or 6 or something, usually, he would be out. And he says even immediately when he said number 10, he would start to feel like you do when you're going under at the dentist's office or something, or when you're getting some surgery done. And he would start to feel even more of a swoon when he said 9, so he would basically lose consciousness before he reached 5. And that was the point at which he would start the REM, rapid eye movement, while he was in the trance. The conductor would see that, and that's when the conductor apparently says, please clear the mind and inform us when the mind is clear. And the source through him will say the mind is clear. And he says he doesn't even hear the suggestion, and he's not, at that point, it's the source talking through him. And then he's only aware of that stuff when he gets up later and hears the tape recording. But so that's really kind of informative, I think, for one person's process of how they go through it. And he, of course, emphasizes it'll be different for everybody. Oh, and also he emphasizes the importance of dreams, along with all these other sources. The importance of paying attention to your dreams, learning the language of the subconscious, which is what all those symbols are you get in your dreams, and learning what they're trying to tell you. And basically you learn by trial and error. Again, like I've said before, probably, you take a given dream, try to make a decision about what those symbols mean, what they're trying to tell you, and then put that into action. Use that as guidance for your decisions for the day. And if you're wrong, then that will work itself out. You will learn that was the wrong interpretation, and also apparently your subconscious may start altering its symbolism to come in line with the way you're interpreting it. But the whole idea is, as you go through that process, you'll get more and more accurate information. And he says also, as you go through the process of practicing with the hypnotism and the trance and practicing with meditation, which he encourages you to do, you'll get better and better and better at it. And that's something you hear everywhere from anyone who's talking about hypnotism, meditation, all this stuff. It's like, it's a skill. It's about practice. It's about being dedicated and consistent, doing things every day in moderation, and getting better and better over time. Definitely not something you fall off a log and do. I mean, sure, it's just like, sounds like it's just like playing piano or something. Sure, there's some people that just fall off a log and they're 5 years old and they can play these fantastic pieces with little or no training. But that's the exception. And I'm sure there are one or two of those hanging around in the psychic world, and those are probably usually the ones that we discover first, giving us readings, like the Caseys and the Paul Solomons, the ones that just immediately are able to do this with almost no effort. But for the rest of us, it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It doesn't mean that it's not for us. It just means that, just like for music or anything else, we're going to have to work at it a little harder than those people, and it will require some consistent practice and discipline, and eventually you'll get to the point where you're really effective at it. So that's really helpful, and lots of good advice there from Ross Peterson. Lots of things that agree very tightly with what we've been given from other sources. So I would highly recommend that you get into that. And heck, while I'm on the topic, this is a book, I think I've mentioned it before. I'll mention it again. Just have the cover here. Realities of the Dreaming Mind by Swami Sivananda Raja. This is not a book that I've found mentioned in any readings yet. I don't think I've found any books dealing with dreams, maybe just one or two that Paul Solomon recommended, but they haven't recommended this one. But it's one that I stumbled on years and years ago, before I even heard of Casey. And it's a really, she was really advanced, a really advanced person in spirituality and in dream interpretation. And this was at the end of her life, when she had been running her own ashram for like 50 years or something. And at the very end, she felt like that was one of the things that remained for her to do, was to give this to the world, give a lot of these personal dream experiences she had had, and her whole method of dream interpretation. And she encourages you to do exactly what all these sources are telling you to do, which is build up your own vocabulary with your own higher self. And again, it's kind of miraculous. It's like you find the same teaching as far as the whole system. You having a higher self, the fact that it communicates through your subconscious, through these symbols, and the fact that you have to interpret them in a given way. Exactly the same here in this book as you find in all these sources, these psychic sources. And they seem to be almost exactly the same with each other. And a lot of the other teachings about the world life perspective, and how these souls were basically sent out from God or given the free will, and some of them went out from God to participate in the creation and become involved in it, and how that led to this whole process we're involved in. That whole perspective is identical to what you get basically identical from what you get from the Unity Church. And Charles Fillmore and his wife, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, they were really involved in what they called introspection, which was apparently this process of going into a certain level of trance, getting answers from your higher self, and voila, look, the answers they get are the same kind of answers. You almost start to get the impression that, gee, maybe these people are actually observing reality instead of just cooking up pet ideas out of nowhere and beating people over the head with them. Maybe they actually are observing something and just reporting. And that's, to me, that's the key issue when you start to contrast this with current religious teaching. the way we normally think about religion is we get the teaching from religious leaders. When we're children, we get this teaching from our parents that the Bible is the Word of God. This is how you pray. This is what it means, etc., etc. And we're all used to getting an arbitrary system of information, most of which can't be proven at all, from our leaders, our spiritual leaders of various types. And if you think about that process, that's a process of getting unknowable information from basically an unknowable source. You just get this nebulous teaching that, it's from the inspired Word of God, and these men were inspired by God, so here's what they wrote. This is what God gave us. This is all we need, and this is what it means. That's all you're given. Nowhere is there a claim that, the people writing this down were able to directly observe the spiritual realms on a regular basis, and this is what they saw. You never get even that kind of information. But still you're expected to adhere to it as if it's even more legit or even more important than the account of someone who could observe things like that. And of course, I think your average fundamentalist Christian would turn right around and say, well, no one is capable of perceiving the spiritual realms like that. Anybody who is telling you that is either being shown stuff by the devil or they're just lying. And that's pretty much where it would end. So I would like to encourage you and encourage everyone who has doubts by pointing out that what you see when you look at the information from these sources, when you look at information from a number of different religions, especially seemingly the more, I don't want to use the word advanced, but the ones that are more focused on practice and open-minded, like Unitarian, Universalist, but they're open to just about everything. But especially Unity, where they're more about saying there is a specific truth out there that can be observed, and here's what we have observed, and they're encouraging you to go through that same process of getting down there and directly observing the truth, not just taking anybody's word for it. Well, that kind of thing directly jives with what these sources are talking about and what Swami Raja was talking about. And I think you'll find a number of spiritual teachers that are talking about this kind of thing more and more, that are agreeing with each other more and more. And that's what I'd like to do with this address and this organization, is to, as those things become apparent, draw everyone's attention to the harmony of ideas, concepts, facts that we get from these spiritual realms, to point out that everyone is clearly, all these people are clearly looking at the same information. They're sitting there observing reality. They're gaining the ability to directly observe things that normally we cannot observe. And so I would encourage everyone that we are apparently in a different age. No longer are we in the age of religion where we cannot know these things, so therefore we have to rely on what we can get from our respected religious authorities. We are in an age of growth for man, where man can apparently begin to grow spiritually enough to perceive these dimensions directly and interact with them directly. And so therefore it's no coincidence that we were given Davis and Casey and now all these others, Douglas Cottrell, Ross Peterson, Paul Solomon, and who knows how many more as we find them. It's no coincidence that they're all appearing now, because now is the time. Now is this turning point. And that's supposed to be one of the most significant things about 2012, apparently, is that the December 12th, 2012 is supposed to be this point where the world kind of starts going up from going down, and we're all, it won't be perceptible apparently to hardly anyone, but that'll really be the point where the fulcrum turns, and I guess the majority of us are working in an upward direction. And so hopefully more and more of us will be capable of doing this kind of thing and observing more clearly the reality that exists beyond the veil, so to speak, beyond our three-dimensional reality we can perceive with our eyes. And so for now, as seeing as how most of us are in the dark, and we don't have those abilities yet, for now, what I'm doing is trying to put these together, to point out where they are saying the same thing, and also try to point out where they're different, which may be some flags to indicate where the given psychic saying the different thing may have not been on the same page that day, or maybe it's just a different way to understand the same thing. But yeah, so that's our overall goal, and I don't want to beat that dead horse. So, okay, in the last, what have we got? 8 minutes, something like that. What should we talk about? Douglas Cottrell. I think it's important to point him out again and talk a little bit more about him, because Ross Peterson, I'll have to go back and read. I'm sorry I haven't looked it up. He did pass away, I'm pretty sure. Okay, this is driving me crazy. I'll have to look it up. But anyway, currently the only deep trance meditation psychic that I know of, that I've been made aware of, I guess now, because of my Cottrell reading, you can say I've been made aware of the fact that there are more, but the only one I'm currently aware of by name that you can go to and get readings is Douglas Cottrell. And like I said before, my experience with him personally was really amazing, and his readings, if you read and or listen, I guess mostly it involves listening to what they've got. If you go to their website, like I said, they've got an entire array of CDs that you can buy, and most of them you can just download the MP3 for like $10 each on all these topics, and each one is like a really long reading about a given topic. And I've only read or listened to some of those, but boy, the ones I have, they're fantastic information. This guy obviously is doing this channeling. He is a genuine channel for the source. Perhaps you could argue maybe he's not as deep as Peterson or Casey, or maybe he's only getting there on some days, or who knows. But the point is, he's a very effective channel. He's doing a fantastic job, and is nothing short of miraculous. And also, he's got a healing ministry that he kind of does. I think he has some kind of church service they do on Sunday that is in London, Ontario, there where they are at, I believe. And he does some healing there, and I know he goes on tour every once in a while and has a kind of healing ministry. So he's definitely developing a lot of abilities that deal with healing, definitely above and beyond the normal just deep trance meditation kind of thing, which was something, by the way, I was encouraged to do by that reading. Was when I'm looking for other sources, look for that. Look for their ability to do other things. And apparently Ross Peterson was developing other psychic abilities in association with his experiments with hypnotism and trance. Paul Solomon definitely had a bunch of abilities like that, and of course Edgar Casey. So there you go. It's pretty much 100%. And I don't know. Maybe that's going to turn out to be a litmus test for all of us. Maybe only after we've reached a certain level of proficiency, psychically speaking, maybe only then we'll be able to do this deep trance meditation or something. So maybe you'll never find a true, genuine channel that has no other abilities or something. I'm not sure. But I just wanted to point out, since I'm on the subject, Douglas Cottrell is starting this mini mansion spiritual center. And you can there's probably a place on their website where you can contact them about this and stuff. You can read a little bit about it there. But, and this is like a little application he gave me several copies of. And this is the first time they've really done something like this. Apparently they're trying to start more of an organization, and I'm not sure what the exact goals of that organization are, but they seem to be more about spreading the word and awareness of the teachings and things, kind of along the lines of what I'm trying to do with this SDC organization. So immediately, I signed up and told him I'd like the SDC to be kind of a chapter or a sister organization or something that works directly with them, and so we can really facilitate what they're doing as we become an organization. Right now it's just me, but down the road, hopefully. So that's an endeavor they're beginning, and I would definitely encourage you to get on his website, read as much as you can about him and about that. He's got a free newsletter. Get on that, on the mailing list, so you can find out what they're doing and when and what's going on. Because that's he's right now, he's the one. He's the living channel. He's the one that's currently doing it, has been doing it for decades, and is very effective, and is also, has this blossoming spiritual work that's surrounding him and apparently growing. So definitely, if you're in that area, around Port Huron and I don't know, Eastern Michigan, that kind of thing, or in Canada, close to where they're at, you could definitely get involved in that day to day. It's a little bit too far for me. It's either one incredibly long day to drive or 2 days practically when the weather's bad and stuff. So it's a little hard for me to get there personally. But sure, if you're that close, definitely get involved or help them out whatever way you feel led. And I'm sure if you're into this prosperity and tithing thing, that would be a terrific place to send your donations, or your 10% or a fraction of your 10 or 11%, whatever you're giving. And that'd be definitely a good place to do it, since they're active and growing. And or get a reading. If you've got the $550 or whatever, I'm sure as they get more demand, they'll probably have to charge more. But so whatever it is at the time, if you can set aside that money and get a reading or two, or if you've got people that you care about, or yourself with kind of unsolvable health problems, or real issues that need help, I definitely encourage you to get a health reading from them. You can even do it by email, send them something in. You don't have to be there in person, and he can still give you a full-blown health reading. And he also does healing himself in his healing ministry and things. So definitely look to him as a resource if you have any of those issues or know people that do. And don't hesitate to tell other people about them. If you go there and get some healing, or get a reading that gives you fantastic medical suggestions and you really get improvement, by all means, please tell everyone you can about them. Don't be afraid to share the fact that this came from this psychic, and don't be afraid to get into this conversation about what's different about this type of psychic rather than your traditional one that you'll go to and get your palm read or something. So, yeah, I guess that's a great way to end this, kind of a solid plug for Douglas Cottrell. Definitely go to his website, read some of the stuff he's got up there, and listen to and watch the videos that Ramston Reglan has posted on YouTube. He's got tons of them and keeps coming out with more, and just some really, really good stuff. And when you get bored of that, pick up Paul Solomon, Volume 1, and just keep going. Lots of good stuff to check out, and we'll keep you posted about more as we find it. So until then, share and enjoy.